My dad is from Sadek, and my mom, I can't be sure. She's from a really, really small village, and I don't think I recall. Both my parents, well, on my mom's side, her family owned a grocery store in a really small village, and on my dad's side, his family was wealthier, and they just had like a very typical Vietnamese upbringing. They just went to school, and then as the war came along, both my parents had to find a way out. I know for my mom, they basically had to, turn all their money into gold, and then they bought, I guess, a spot on a boat to go to Malaysia, and then that was how they started leaving before the war started.
They left before the war started?
Yeah, they did, because they, a lot of the soldiers were starting to invade into the village, and then my grandma didn't feel it was safe for them to live there. And so she sent about 3 of her daughters on a boat with gold. And, the way it works is they couldn't carry actual money in case pirates hijacked the boat. Right. So what you did was you swallowed gold, and then you would hope that once you landed, you were able to, take it out. But yeah, so my mom's boat, they left for Malaysia, and they actually were hijacked by pirates, and then one of my mom's sisters was pregnant, and then she unfortunately lost her baby, and a lot of people were dying because they went 7 days without food or water. Wow. So a lot of people were drinking their own urine to stay alive. But then both my mom and my dad ended up in Malaysia at a refugee camp, and that was where they first met. And then from there on, you needed an American sponsor family in America to get a flight over there. So they waited for about 1 or 2 years at the refugee camp, and then eventually they flew over. My dad ended up in Chicago, Illinois, and he finished high school there. And my mom ended up in Minnesota, and then they were both there for a while, and then they both somehow came over to Los Angeles with family, and my parents met up again in LA, and then they eventually got married. They were more fearful of the communists because, being from the South, they kind of, I wouldn't say it fully embraced the American soldiers, but it was kind of like interesting that they came over. And then I know a lot of families over there, they were kind of enamored with the American soldier, like coming in to save them and stuff. But for my grandma, she just wanted to pick her kids out. I'm not sure about her stance, but I know my parents personally, they're very anti-communist. Okay, it's kind of like done behind the scenes, because you don't really advertise that you know people who can get you out, because if anyone were to tell on you to someone else, that's your life. I know my grandfather was sent into prison during this time, so it was only my grandma was around to send off the kids. And I guess through the grapevine they heard of somebody, and you can only go on hearsay, and so you have this meetup spot. So my mom said you had to go through fields, and sometimes it was a treacherous journey just to get to the meetup spot, and then there's this rickety little boat that takes you to the actual boat, and then you're doing this all at night because you can't get caught. So you're basically running around trying to find this meetup spot. Once you find it, you just hope that they don't take your money and drop you off somewhere and get left. On my mom's side, all her siblings left. My mom had 10 siblings, 8 sisters, 2 brothers. Everyone left except for two sisters, and then both her parents stayed. And then on my dad's side, everyone came over basically. So yeah.
All through the same way through Malaysia, the refugee camps?
Yeah, they all ended up in the refugee camps. But yeah, so my mom's side stayed, and they still have their same village, and now they have a second house, but my grandfather eventually died. Yeah, life for them I think has been okay, but like when I visited my grandparents on my mom's side, I'd say back in the 6th grade, and I remember seeing communist soldiers walk through the village on horses. Like, it was really weird because at the time I didn't understand why everyone in the village was panicking. Because I remember just sitting in my grandma's market, and then just hearing all these people suddenly say, "Oh, I put everything away." So they were putting away like all the stuff in their markets to try to look like they didn't have very much. And then I noticed these guys coming on horses, and I was like, why do they look so official? And later on, I realized they were communists, and everyone was hiding their stuff. Just
this was in your 6th grade, when you were in 6th grade?
Yeah. So they were just going through the villages, and I could sense everyone's fear as they came through. I know on my mom's side they actually live with the sponsors, her and her two sisters. The sponsors took care of them every way. Like they bought them clothes, they paid for
Wow.
some of the stuff that comes along with high school, because my mom and her sisters went to high school in Minnesota. She talked about going skiing for the first time. Like I felt like they got a lot of the stuff that maybe other Vietnamese refugees didn't. Both my parents were lucky because they did get to go to high school. I've seen both of their high school yearbooks, and I've read some of the stuff that people wrote in it. It seems like on my dad's side he befriended some Chinese students, and also a lot of Vietnamese students too. Because my dad was half Chinese, because his dad was Chinese living in Vietnam. So my dad was able to reach out to two groups of friends, and it seemed like he liked high school. Like he played basketball in high school, and he also he worked 2 jobs in high school to pay for everything, and he bought his first car with his own money because he had 6 siblings, and then supporting 6 siblings in America was really expensive for his family, so they couldn't pay for very much. So I know my dad worked at Wiener Schnitzel in high school, so he's told me stories about that. So it seemed like he had an okay time in high school, but I do know he harbors resentment that it was so hard for his parents to pay for the 7 kids that they had. So I can see that he's kind of bitter that he didn't get the ideal American, I guess, teenage years, because he had to pay for everything on his own. And on my mom's side, I know she graduated from Glendale High, which isn't too far from here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So and that's where she got her diploma. She went to Glendale Community College for a couple of years. It seems like she had an okay time too, but she also had a couple jobs. I think for both of them, most of their problems were within their own family, trying to, I guess, find the median for them. Like, are they going to be fully American? Are they going to hold on to the Vietnamese culture? So I felt like for them, the enemy wasn't so much the American, but their own families, because their families were very restrictive, and they really shaped how my parents turned out. I think in a sense that it does, because whether or not we realize it, our parents did a lot to get here. Some people my age aren't as grateful, but then I do feel like it was important that my parents told me their story when I was growing up. I remember my mom just used to tell them to me when I was going to sleep. She used to make it sound kind of adventurous, and sometimes I thought it wasn't real, but looking back, I could see that those stories, she wanted those stories to shape how I grew up. And I think it did influence the way they raised me too, because they took school very seriously, because their own schooling was interrupted by the war and the repercussions of the war. And then so they just wanted to do whatever they could so that my sister and I wouldn't have to work at Wiener Schnitzel's to pay for our own tuition or anything like that. And then they try to support us in every way they can, as opposed to my mom, who had to pay rent to her own sister, or my dad, who was always overshadowed by his own siblings. So they try to just make our upbringing a lot easier and less stressful. Well, I know my parents were still affected, but I guess how much you let it affect your life depends on how well off you are in America. I really think that's it. Because if you ended up doing really well here, then you feel grateful that everything you went through led up to this point, and that you have all these things that you never thought that you would have. But on the other side, I know a lot of the Vietnamese in Garden Grove is that they really hold on to their culture, their Vietnamese culture, and because I know they're everywhere you go, you hear someone speaking Vietnamese, and all the stores are in Vietnamese. So I feel like they held on to their culture a lot more, and perhaps because they didn't get everything out of the American dream. Because I know my cousins living there, they're financially harder off than maybe my parents, and so most of the refugee families that ended up there, and then their kids, the financial level is slightly lower than I guess the general American citizen, because they have struggled so much, and then they all live together, and so their sense of American nationalism is pretty low, because all they do is just talk about Vietnam.
Do you think that's common, where Vietnamese come here and they kind of just cling on to each other because they don't feel like they can integrate into society? And do you think your parents are they the exception?
I think my parents are the exception, just because they had positive experiences with American or white people. Like, depending on how bitter you are, that kind of decided whether you held on to your Vietnamese culture or not. I mean, like, my parents tried, but they weren't able to fight off the Americanization fully. Like, I know at my house they get mad when I started speaking English more and more, because up until kindergarten I could only speak Vietnamese, and I learned English when I got into a Christian
So they
school.
wanted you to speak Vietnamese.
Yeah, and then slowly, as I started being exposed to more and more of the public education system, I started speaking English more and more. I was watching TV in English and stuff. Then eventually I lost a lot of my own language.
Were they okay with that, with you becoming more Americanized? Is there a culture
I
clash?
mean, they were kind of upset when it first started happening. I know in middle school my dad would always be like, speaking Vietnamese, and then I'd just be like, oh, why? Like, why do you want me to speak Vietnamese all the time? Like, everyone speaks English. And then so there was that kind of traditional view versus the second generation view.
Right.
So we kind of butt heads there. And I know a lot of the things that people my age did growing up, my parents were very like, why are you doing this? And they didn't believe in letting their kids out either, because I know in Vietnam people were very strict on their female daughters. And so when I started wanting to go out in middle school, I remember I never got to sleep over at anyone's house, and I didn't get a cell phone until everyone else had already gotten one, and then my parents finally acquiesced. They really pushed academics, and they really didn't want their kids to go out. And then so it was a constant battle between me and my dad to try because I was so Americanized, and then he was trying to acclimate to that, to start realizing that his kids weren't the way he.
So they adjusted.
Sort of. Well, they kind of had to, because like when I got to be a teenager, like we started fighting a lot about, like, oh, should she go out? Like, shouldn't she be studying? Like, why don't you speak English anymore? It's just. It was always like a traditional view versus the modern view, and
right.
I think it was more so my parents were trying to acclimate to how kids in this new like generation grow up. Like, because I think they're trying to raise me and my sister the way that they were raised, but it just doesn't work here anymore.
Do you have a brother?
No, yeah, 2 daughters. So I think that could have tied into it too.